Today we're talking about 28mm lenses, and I've got 9 cameras out for you. 7 rangefinders, 2 SLR cameras, and then if you stay to the end of the video I'll also talk about digital. Leica cameras, M, Leica 3, Leica CL, Leica R. We then have Voigtlander, we've got Bessa L, R, T, and I'll do a special mention to the R4A, R4M. We have other rangefinders, and then lastly we've got Nikon SLR cameras. When it comes to shooting 28mm on film, you have various options when it comes to rangefinder cameras. I've tried to break it down, and as I see it, there are 4 different types of rangefinder camera options. And then of course you also have SLR cameras, so I've included a couple of those just for examples. So the question is, if you love shooting 28mm lenses, which is the best film camera for your needs? Stay till the end of the video and I'll do a full wrap up of which I think may be the best for different conditions. I hope you enjoy the video. Where shall I start? We've got Leica. So the ideal option would be something like a Leica M6 for shooting 28mm, because the Leica M6 has a built-in 28mm viewfinder. This means you're able to compose any 28mm lens through the viewfinder and everything is really easy. So ideal scenario, pick a film camera that already has 28mm frame lines if you're planning to shoot with a 28mm lens. Makes sense, right? So for me, that's my Leica M6 and my Leica M4P. And then the second option when it comes to Leica in terms of types of cameras is the Leica CLE. This is actually a Leica CL, not the CLE. One of the main differences between the CL and the CLE is the CLE has a 28mm frame line. This one doesn't. But if you are a CL user, you can just use the entire viewfinder area to guesstimate your 28mm composition. Next we have Voigtlander. If you're not a Leica shooter and you prefer Voigtlander, the only Voigtlander Bessa camera with 28mm frame lines is the Voigtlander Bessa R3A and R4M. That brings me on to my second group of cameras, which are cameras with a built-in viewfinder, but usually only a 35mm frame line. So for example, you've got the Leica M2, you've got the Leica CL as shown here, and then for Voigtlander you've got things like the Voigtlander Bessa R as one example. So I'll just show you closer. The Voigtlander Bessa R gives you the option to have 35mm frame lines, and then what you do is you look to the viewfinder and then just use the entire viewfinder area to estimate your 28mm composition. The advantage of having cameras with a 35mm frame line and estimating composition is you don't need an additional hot shoe viewfinder, and that's what we're going to come on to next. So when it comes to rangefinder cameras, many of the older cameras only have a 50mm frame line. So for example the Leica M3, which I don't have here, but you've seen it many times, and I brought this out for a change. This is a Nikon S2. This, like the M3, only has a 50mm viewfinder, meaning when it comes to shooting a 28mm lens such as this 28mm Voigtlander scope lens, it's not particularly well suited because you cannot compose accurately when you've only got a 50mm viewfinder. So for that reason, for cameras with only 50mm frame lines, that can be Fed 2, it could be Kiev 4A or my Kiev cameras, Leica 2F. Any of the older cameras only have 50mm frame lines, you need to use an external viewfinder, and I'm going to come on to those in a second. But let's just talk about the fourth category. The fourth category are cameras with no viewfinder whatsoever. So first let's have a look at my Leica 1C. So if we take that off for a second, you can see this camera is slightly different. It has no rangefinder and no viewfinder. It has 2 spaces where they can go. It's a slightly different type of camera. So these cameras, obviously you're going to need to use an external viewfinder. So option 1, as I say, is for Leica. You can use any of the Leica 1 cameras. These don't have viewfinders or rangefinders. And then there are 2 cameras made by Voigtlander that you may or may not be aware of that also don't have a viewfinder. Option 1 is the Voigtlander Bessa T. See any of my Voigtlander Bessa videos to see full reviews on pretty much any of the cameras on this table. The Voigtlander Bessa T is a slightly different camera because it has a built-in rangefinder but no viewfinder. So again, you need to get yourself a external accessory shoe viewfinder if you want to use a 28mm lens such as this Almarit on a Bessa T camera. The second Voigtlander Bessa camera that doesn't have a viewfinder is the Voigtlander Bessa L. This is the best value Voigtlander Bessa camera, and similar to the Leica 1C, it also has no viewfinder, no rangefinder. Okay, let's take a quick break from the information. Here are a few 28mm photos shot with various cameras, both digital and film cameras. You can see that a 28mm lens can be used for both portraits and the usual kind of landscapes and wider shots. The closer up portraits are shot with either an M camera or a CL camera. The CL camera is a crop sensor, so I guess I am cheating in that regard. But most of these photos are full frame, especially all these wider shots that you see here. Some of the landscape photos are me running around with the camera in Poland, so that's when I need a small 28mm setup. Okay, back to the information. So now let's look at viewfinders. Obviously there are lots of different viewfinders on the market. Two of the popular ones I use, or one particularly popular one, is the Voigtlander bright line viewfinders. For me, these are the best viewfinder for accurately composing. When you're composing kind of corner to corner, you can see the viewfinder there. But they do add some bulk to your camera, as we'll talk about in a second. The second option, this is the smallest 28mm viewfinder I could find after doing lots of research. And the awesome guys at Kex Cameras sent me this and a 35mm finder for free some time ago to try out. It does give more of an estimated view and there are no frame lines, but it does make your camera setup much smaller. If you're into maybe cycling or running, you may prefer to have a smaller 28mm setup than a larger 28mm setup, and also weight may be a factor for yourself. So for example, if you want the smallest 28mm shooting setup that I'm aware of, feel free to let me know in the comments if there is something lighter. The lightest I've managed to create, if that's the correct word, is the Voigtlander Bessa L, which is the lightest camera on this table, with the Orion 15 28mm lens, which is the lightest lens on this table, with the Kex 28mm viewfinder, which is the smallest viewfinder I can find for 28mm. So this is my go-to running setup if I want to run with a camera in my running belt. If you want the smallest, my smallest setup is actually the Leica 1C with a Canon 28mm lens. This is actually the 25, which I still need to do a review on, and the 25 is even smaller than the 28. So if I want my ultimate smallest wide angle shooter, I'm going to use a 25mm Canon on the Leica 1C, and I'll estimate the 25mm composition with the 28mm small finder. But for any of you geeks out there, there's the 28mm Canon on the Bessa, and you can see the 25mm is very slightly smaller. So that's the smallest and lightest setups I have for my rangefinder cameras. Special mention to the Leica Summron 28mm f5.6, I believe. That lens, I believe, is potentially even smaller than the Canon 28mm. And then for you Nikon shooters, what about SLR cameras? So the smallest SLR camera setup I've managed to create is my Nikon FG20, which is my smallest, lightest Nikon, paired up with the Voigtlander Color Scope 28mm f2.8 lens. Again, see that video if you want to learn more about the SL lenses. So this now becomes a similar size to a Leica setup. If I hold the Leica M6 next to it, the Nikon setup is a lot lighter. Obviously Leicas are normally well built and slightly heavier, so this may actually be myth busting territory, but you can make a Nikon setup smaller than your Leica M setup if you don't mind having a plastic cheap Nikon. And this then brings me on to why I use Nikon cameras when I now also use Leica SLR cameras. The problem I have with Leica R cameras is the wide lens I have is the 24mm lens, which is actually a Minolta lens. I'm sure some of you will be keen to tell me in the comments, but I just love the hood design on this lens. Is just so sexy. The Nikon gives it a much smaller, lighter setup, but not just that. I would almost bet my cameras on the fact that the Voigtlander Color Scope on this Nikon FG20 is going to be a lot better optically than the Leica 24mm. Maybe I'll do a test at some point. Leica isn't always best, so just pointing out the obvious. So what about 28mm lenses on an SLR camera? These photos are all shot on film and they are not cropped, so you can see you can get much closer shooting a 28mm lens on a SLR camera than you can with a rangefinder 28mm lens. And you can even get subject background separation, which you probably cannot do on a rangefinder camera, especially those at 1 meter distance. So I do love the versatility of using a 28mm lens on an SLR camera. So I guess the question you have for me is, which is the best camera for shooting 28mm? I would choose a later Leica M camera if you'd like a light meter and 28mm frame lines. I would choose a Voigtlander Bessa if you like a light meter and a cheaper setup. Just make sure you get the Leica screw mount version or the Leica M mount version, depending on whether you're using an M mount lens or a screw mount lens. So I use Voigtlander Bessa L for my running setup. I use a Leica 1C or a Leica 1F for my kind of nicest looking, smallest camera for maybe street photography, but that doesn't have a light meter. So then I'd use my Leica M4P or Leica M6 if I want, say, a more practical setup, or if I want to use flash, maybe I'm doing wedding photography, I would always use Leica M cameras for doing 28mm wedding photos. But despite me being a rangefinder boy, most versatile camera of all those cameras mentioned is the little cheap Nikon. So the same applies to any SLR camera. You just need to find an SLR camera which you enjoy using, and then using a 28mm lens on an SLR camera. If you only have one camera, one lens, and you want to be able to do close-up photos, maybe photos of your dinner or your coffee, things like that, as well as landscapes, as well as portraits, you can do that with an SLR camera. Hence I have different cameras for different situations. And then as a bonus for any of you that stay till the end of the video, what about if you're shooting 28mm on Leica digital cameras? My first choice would be the Leica CL APS-C crop sensor camera with the 80mm pancake lens. It's an Elmerit TL lens, giving you a 28mm equivalent. That is my smallest, lightest digital camera setup. The obvious choice, obviously, for 28mm Leica shooters is to buy the Leica Q or the Leica Q2, because you get the amazing Summilux lens, and it's a fast lens, but it is a fixed lens camera. So when you shoot with a Q or a Q2, obviously your only choice is 28mm if you're shooting full frame raw files. Then for you M shooters, if you're using lenses like the Elmerit, you can use your Leica M10, Leica M240, things like that. Those digital cameras do have 28mm built-in frame lines, so you have no issues shooting with 28mm lenses. And it does give you a much smaller, nicer setup than using perhaps something like a SL that I now have, or like a SL2. Those cameras are bigger, so I find for street photography, I still prefer M cameras with maybe something like the Elmerit lens. If you want to see more details on individual 28mm lenses and which 28mm lens may be best for you, I recently reviewed both the Voigtlander Ultron 28mm f2 version 2, but I also did a 28mm shootout video, so if you want to know what 28mm lens to get, you're probably best to check out one of those two videos. I tried to include as many 28mm options as I could think of, but if I've missed any obvious ones, feel free to let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this little 28mm journey, please hit the like button, and feel free to subscribe if you like these types of gear videos. Often we're looking at Leicas, rangefinders, Nikons, and anything to do with film. If you want to see the photos I take with these cameras, you can follow me on Instagram at MrLeica.com. And as always, a massive thank you to my patrons. We do have a live Q&A next Wednesday evening, so if you're not yet a patron and you want to get involved, feel free to sign up before next Wednesday. Thanks for watching. Bye.